Monday, September 21st, 1942. Dear Kitty, today I'm going to tell you our general news. Mrs. Van Daan is unbearable. I get nothing but blow-ups from her for my continuous chatter. She is always pestering us in some way or the other. This is the latest. She doesn't want to wash up the pans if there is a fragment left. Instead of putting it into a glass dish as we've always done until now, she leaves it in the pan to go bad. After the next meal, Margot sometimes has about 7 pans to wash up, and then Madame says, "Well, well, Margot, you have got a lot to do." I'm busy with Daddy working on his family tree. As we go along, he tells me little bits about everyone. It's terribly interesting. Mr. Kufius brings a few special books for me every other week. I am thrilled with the Joop ter Heul series. I've enjoyed the whole of Sissy van Marksveld very much, and I've read in Zomberzothide 4 times and still laugh about some of the ludicrous situations that arise. Term time has begun again. I'm working hard at my French and manage to pump in 5 irregular verbs per day. Peter sighs and groans over his English. A few schoolbooks have just arrived. We have a good stock of exercise books, pencils, rubbers, and labels, as I bought these with me. I sometimes listen to the Dutch news from London. Heard Prince Bernhard recently. He said that Princess Juliana is expecting a baby about next January. I think it is lovely. It surprises the others that I should be so keen on the royal family. I was being discussed, and they decided that I'm not completely stupid after all, which had the effect of making me work extra hard the next day. I certainly don't want to still be in the first form when I'm 14 or 15. Also, the fact that I'm hardly allowed to read any decent books was mentioned. Mummy is reading Heeren, Rowan, and Newton now, which I'm not allowed. Margot is. First I must be more developed, like my talented sister. Then we talk about my ignorance of philosophy and psychology, about which I know nothing. Perhaps by next year I shall be wiser. I looked up these difficult words quickly in Conan. I have just woke up to the disturbing fact that I have one long-sleeved dress and 3 cardigans for the winter. I've received permission from Daddy to knit a jumper of white sheep's wool. It's not very nice wool, but as long as it's warm, that's all that matters. We have some clothes deposited with friends, but unfortunately we shall not see them until after the war. That is, if they're still there. I had just written something about Mrs. Van Daan when she came. Slap! I closed the book. Hey, Anne, can't I just have a look? I'm afraid not. Just the last page, then? No, I'm sorry. Naturally, it gave me a frightful shock because there was an unflattering description of her on this particular page. Yours, Anne. Friday, September 25th. September 25th, 1942. Dear Kitty, yesterday evening I went upstairs and visited the Van Daans. I do so occasionally to have a chat. Sometimes it can be quite fun. Then we have some moth biscuits. The biscuit tin is kept in the wardrobe, which is full of mothballs, and drink lemonade. We talked about Peter. I told him how Peter often strokes my cheek and that I wish he wouldn't, as I don't like being pawed by boys. In a typical way parents have, they asked if I couldn't get fond of Peter because he certainly liked me very much. I thought, oh dear, and said, oh no. Imagine it. I didn't say that I thought Peter rather awkward, but that it was probably shyness, as many boys who haven't had much to do with girls are like that. I must say that the refugee committee of the secret annex male section is very ingenious. I'll tell you what they've done now to get news of us through to Mrs. Van Dijk Travis, chief representative, and her friend, who had surreptitiously hidden some of our things for us. They typed a letter to a chemist in South Zealand, who does business with our firm in such a way that he has sent the envelope replied back in an addressed envelope. Daddy addressed the envelope to the office. When this envelope arrives from Zealand, the enclosed letter is taken out and is replaced by a message in Daddy's handwriting as a sign of life. Like this, Van Dijk won't become suspicious when he reads the note. They specially chose Zealand because it is so close to Belgium, and the letter could have easily been smuggled over the border. In addition, no one is allowed into Zealand without a special permit, so if they thought we were there, he couldn't try and look us up. Yours, Anne. Sunday, September 27th, 1942. Dear Kitty, just had a big bust-up with Mummy for the umpteenth time. We simply don't get on together these days, and Margot and I didn't hit it off any too well either. As a rule, we don't go in for such outbursts as this in our family. Still, it's by no means always pleasant for me. Margot's and Mummy's natures are completely strange to me. I can understand my friends better than my own mother. Too bad. We often discuss post-war problems, for example, how one ought to address servants. Mrs. Van Daan had another tantrum. She is terribly moody. She keeps hiding more of her private belongings. Mummy ought to answer each Van Daan's disappearance with a frank disappearance. How some people do adore bringing up other people's children in addition to their own. The Van Dams are that kind. Margot doesn't need it. She is such a goody-goody, perfection itself, but I seem to have enough mischief in me for the two of us put together. You should hear us at mealtimes, with reprimands and cheeky answers flying to and fro. Mummy and Daddy always defend me stoutly. I'd have to give up if it weren't for them, although they do tell me that I mustn't talk so much, that I must be more retiring and not poke my nose into everything. Still, I seem doomed to failure. If Daddy wasn't so patient, I'd be afraid I was going to turn out to be a terrific disappointment to my parents, and they are pretty lenient with me. If I take a small helping of some vegetables, I detest and make up with potatoes. The Van Dams and Mevru, in particular, can't get over it, that any child should be so spoiled. Come along, Anne, have a few more vegetables, she says straight away. No, thank you, Mrs. Van Dam, I answer. I have plenty of potatoes. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so, too. Have a few more, she says, pressing them on me until Daddy comes to my rescue. Then we have for Mrs. Van Dam, you ought to have been in our home. We were properly brought up. It's absurd that Anne's so frightfully spoiled. I wouldn't put up with it if Anne were my daughter. These are always her first and last words. If Anne were my daughter. Thank heavens I'm not. But to come back to this upbringing business, there was a deadly silence after Mrs. Van Dam had finished speaking yesterday. Then Daddy said, I think Anne is extremely well brought up. She has learned one thing anyway, and that is to make no reply to your long sermons. As to the vegetables, look at your own plate, Mrs. Van Dam. Look at your own plate. Mrs. Van Dam was beaten, well and truly beaten. She had taken a minute helping of vegetables herself, but she is not spoiled. Oh no, too many vegetables in the evening make her constipated. Why on earth doesn't she keep her mouth shut about me? Then she wouldn't need to make such feeble excuses. It's gorgeous the way Mrs. Van Dam blushes. I don't, and that is just what she hates. Yours, Anne. Monday, September 28, 1942. Dear Kitty, I had to stop yesterday long before I finished. I must tell you about another quarrel, but before I start on that, something else. Why do grown-ups quarrel so easily, so much, and over the most idiotic things? Up till now, I thought that only children squabbled and that wore off as you grew up. Of course, there is sometimes a real reason for a quarrel, but this is just plain bickering. I suppose I should get used to it, but I can't, nor do I think I shall, as long as I am the subject of nearly every discussion. They use the word discussion instead of quarrel. Nothing, I repeat, nothing about me is right. My general appearance, my character, my manners are discussed from A to Z. I'm expected, by order, to simply swallow all the harsh words and shouts in silence, and I'm not used to this. In fact, I can't. I'm not going to take all these insults lying down. I'll show them that Anne Frank wasn't born yesterday. They'll be surprised, and perhaps they'll keep their mouths shut when I let them say that I'm going to start educating them. Shall I take up that attitude? Plain barbarism? I'm simply amazed again and again over their awful manners, and especially stupidity, Mrs. Van Dam's. But as soon as I get used to this, and it won't be long, then I'll give them some of their own back and no half measures. Then they'll change their tune. Am I really so bad-mannered, conceited, headstrong, pushing, stupid, lazy, etc., as they all say? Oh, of course not. I have my faults, just like everyone else. I know that, but they thoroughly exaggerate everything. Kitty, if you only knew how I sometimes boil under so many jibbers and jeers, and I don't know how long I should be able to stifle my rage. I shall just blow up one day. Still, no more of this. I've bored you long enough with all these quarrels. But I simply must tell you one of the highly interesting discussions at the table. Somehow or other, we got on the subject of Pim's, Daddy's nickname, extreme modesty. Even the most stupid people have to admit this about Daddy. Suddenly, Mrs. Van Dam says, I too have an unassuming nature, more so than my husband. Did you ever? This sentence in itself shows quite clearly how thoroughly forward and pushing she is. Mrs. Van Dam thought he ought to give Mr. Van Dam thought he ought to give an explanation regarding the reference to himself. I don't wish to be modest. In my experience, it does not pay. Then to me, take my advice, Anne. Don't be too unassuming. It doesn't get you anywhere. Mummy agreed with us too, but Mrs. Van Dam had to add, as always, her ideas on the subject. Her next remark was addressed to Mummy and Daddy. You have a strange outlook on life. Fancy saying such a thing to Anne. It was very different when I was young, and I feel sure that it still is, except in your modern home. This was a direct hit at the way Mummy brings up her daughters. Mrs. Van Dam was scarlet by this time. Mummy calm and cool as a cucumber. People who blush get so hot and excited is quite a handicap in such a situation. Mummy, still entirely unruffled, but anxious to close the conversation as soon as possible, thought for a second, and then said, "I find too, Mrs. Van Daan, that one gets on better in life and one is not over modest. My husband now and Margot and Peter are exceptionally modest, whereas your husband and you and I, though not exactly the opposite, don't allow ourselves to be completely pushed to one side." Mrs. Van Daan: "But, Mrs. Frank, I don't understand you. I'm so very modest and retiring. How could you think of calling me anything else?" Mummy: "I did not say you were exactly forward, but no one could say you had a retiring disposition." Mrs. Van Daan: "Let us get this matter cleared up once and for all. I'd like to know in any way I am pushing. I know one thing, if I didn't look after myself, I'd soon be starving." This absurd remark in self-defense just made Mummy rock with laughter. That irritated Mrs. Van Daan, who added a string of German-Dutch, Dutch-German expressions until she became completely tongue-tied. Then she rose from her chair and was about to leave the room. Suddenly her eye fell on me. You should have seen her. Unfortunately, at the very moment that she turned around, I was shaking my head sorrowfully, not on purpose, but quite involuntarily, for I had been following the whole conversation so closely. Mrs. Van Daan turned round and began to reel off a lot of harsh German, common in an ill manner, just like a coarse, red-faced fishwife. It was a marvelous sight. If I could draw, I'd have liked to catch her like this. It was a scream, such a stupid, foolish little person. Anyway, I've learned one thing now. You only really get to know people when you've had a jolly good row with them. Then, and then only, you can judge their true characters. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, September 29th, 1942. Dear Kitty, extraordinary things can happen to people who go into hiding. Just imagine, as there is no bath, we use a wash tub, and because there is hot water in the office, by which I always mean the whole of the lower floor, all 7 of us take it in turns to make use of this great luxury. But because we are all so different, and some are more modest than others, each member of the family has found his own place for carrying out the performance. Peter uses the kitchen in spite of its glass door. When he is going to have a bath, he goes to each one of us in turn and tells us that we must not walk past the kitchen for half an hour. He seems to think this is sufficient. Mr. Van Daan goes right upstairs to him. To him it is worth the bother of carrying hot water all that way, so as to have the seclusion of his own room. Mrs. Van Daan simply doesn't bathe at all at present. She is waiting to see which is the best place. Daddy has his bath in the private office, Mummy behind a fire guard in the kitchen. Margot and I have chosen the front office for our scrub. The curtains there are drawn on Saturday afternoons, so we wash ourselves in semi-darkness. However, I don't like this place any longer, and since last week I've been on the lookout for more comfortable quarters. Peter gave me an idea, and that was to try the large office water closet. There I can sit down, have the light on, lock the door, pour my own bath water away, and am safe from prying eyes. I tried my beautiful bathroom on Sunday for the first time, and although it sounds mad, I think it is the best place of all. Last week the plumber was at work downstairs to move the drains and water pipes from the office water closet to the passage. This change is a precaution against frozen pipes, in case we should have a cold winter. The plumber's visit was far from pleasant for us. Not only were we unable to draw water the whole day, but we could not go to the water closet either. Now it is rather indecent to tell you what we did to overcome this difficulty. However, I am not such a prude that I can't talk about these things. The day we arrived here, Daddy and I improvised a potty for ourselves. Not having a better receptacle, we sacrificed a glass preserving jar for this purpose. During the plumber's visit, nature's offerings were deposited in these jars in the sitting room during the day. I don't think this was nearly as bad as having to sit still and not talk the whole day. You can't imagine what a trial that was for Miss Quack Quack. I have to whisper on ordinary days, but not being able to speak or move was 10 times worse. After being flattened by 3 days of continuous sitting, my bottom was very stiff and painful. Some exercises at bedtime helped. Yours, Anne.